Welcome back, everybody, to another live stream. And today we're going to talk big pedals, perhaps the biggest pedal on the market. But beyond just their size, kind of the philosophy and thinking behind the development of this pedal, we've got James from Pedaling Innovations here to talk about how he came about with the Catalyst pedal. But also, he has this great document called the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto, which we'll talk about in some with a lot of depth. And we're having a couple technical difficulties. You'll notice that the camera is not the usual awesome camera. The computers are just being glitchy today. So this is actually the second time I am doing this intro. But before we talk with James, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Many of you, or a handful of you, are on the Zoom call. You'll get a chance to ask your question of James. That's one of the fun perks of being a Patreon supporter. And as always, if you like this focus on non-competitive cycling content, we've got a bunch of merch. So still a bunch of our party pace patches. These little things glow in the dark, so you can continue the party after hours. So in the YouTube chat, will someone let me know that this time the feed is going? But all that said, let's talk to James. Hey, James, welcome back.
Russ, yes, back again.
I'm sorry the feed appears to be cursed today, but let's kick off again. You've got this amazing document. It's called the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto. I'm going to put a link to it in the video description, so if you guys want to check it out on your own. But give us some kind of a high-level points in the manifesto.
Sure, yeah. Like the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto, in a nutshell, is my a collection of studies and articles that I've put together over the years, trying to illuminate what the actual science and movement principles are behind the pedal stroke, and then, how do we apply that knowledge to the bike? And the reason that I wrote it is because my original intent was to try and figure out how clipless pedals work, because as a strength coach, I was working with riders who were riding clipless pedals. I was working with Aaron Gwynn. I was his original mountain bike strength coach. Worked with him in the Yeti World Cup team. And so I had all these riders who were riding clipless pedals. And so my motivation was to figure out, well, how do they work, so that I could design better programs to enhance what they were doing. And at the time, it was that you can pull up on the backstroke and keep this perfect foot position. And these were the reasons given. And so I just wanted to check into it for myself and just say, okay, well, what are the studies saying? Because as a fitness, I've come from a fitness background. Before I got into mountain biking, I've been a personal trainer for quite a while. I used to work for a company that certified personal trainers, the International Sports Sciences Association. And so I knew, especially in like the supplement industry, you had to check what the studies say, right? Because you'll get like, hey, this study says this, but well, let's see what the actual study was and what the results were, and not just take like their conclusion from it, because there can be giant differences sometimes when you read the studies for yourself. And so I just wanted to like double check and just make sure, like, hey, how do these things work, so that I can see for myself, instead of just taking everybody's word for it. What are they doing? What does the science actually show? And so, people act like you can just throw a stick and hit 5 studies that show that clipless pedals are better, and here's how they work and all this stuff. And I started digging into it, and I couldn't find anything. Mm-hmm. And so then I actually started getting people in my network sending me studies that pointed in the other direction. Things like studies that said you don't need to pull up on the backstroke, that you don't need to be on the ball of the foot, all of these kind of sacred cows when it came to pedaling your bike and foot position and how to be balanced and perform well on your bike. The actual studies, the actual science pointed in a different direction than what the cycling industry was telling us. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, I started, bringing the stuff to light through my blog and stuff. And my motivation was really just to let people know, hey, here's what I'm finding, right? Do your own research, but this at least can get you started in a direction of here's some actual studies that you can look at. But don't get bamboozled by lies and myths and half-truths that the cycling industry just keeps perpetuating for no other reason than to really just to sell clipless pedals. Again, like my background from the fitness industry, I see this, like everyone knows that walking on a treadmill for 45 minutes while you're watching TV is not going to get you fit. But you walk into any health club and what do they have? Rows of treadmills and all this cardio equipment. Well, you know why? Because the cardio portion of the fitness industry makes a lot of money. And so there's a lot of money behind this narrative. Despite what the science says, despite what the results say, there's a lot of money behind this narrative. And this is the exact same thing that's happening with clipless pedals. There is a lot of money behind the narrative that supports clipless pedals and how they work. So the cycling industry does not want you guys to know about these studies, does not want you to know about the truth, because you're going to realize, like, hey, like, we've kind of been lied to
Right.
for quite a while about these things. So, but that's what the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto is about, and kind of what the motivation for putting it together was.
Yeah, we talked earlier the first time about a very visible study that GCN did, where they had one of the presenters. He had a bike. He was on this big kind of moving treadmill, and he was riding both clipless and flats, and they were taking all sorts of like VO2 measurements as well as testing the blood lactate levels. And at the end of the study, they actually found that the flat pedals were more efficient. I mean, it wasn't like a huge margin, but still, it definitely went in that direction. And at the end of it, you could tell that he was very sheepish about the results, and he was kind of backpedaling, trying to rationalize how that could happen in the lab. But in the real world, of course, clipless would still come out on top.
Yeah. No, I remember that one well. I wrote an article on that, highlighting that, and I even mentioned that you could see that he visibly was choking on the words as they were coming out. And, I completely understand why. Just my own experience, I know that, like, you do not want to be the guy who walks into the Church of Cycling and tells everybody that their clipless pedal god is dead. It doesn't make you a popular guy at the party. Right. So you don't want to be the scientist who did the study who said that flats are better than clipless pedals, because everyone's going to question everything, like, your upbringing, your education, your motivation, like all of these things, because everyone knows that clipless pedals are better.
Right.
And if you're not towing that line, then you are going to get in trouble. I mean, again, I've mentioned this before on some other podcasts. Again, there could be other reasons for it, but like I look at a guy like Sam Hill, who's like the best flat pedal rider in the history of the planet. Like, maybe he just doesn't like want to say anything. Like, maybe he's just a quiet guy, but he's awfully quiet about flat pedals. Like, you never hear him talk about like the value of flat pedals, and that flat pedals could be better, and that there could be some riders out there that would benefit from being on flat pedals. You don't hear that. And I think that, again, like I said, I could be totally wrong, but based on my experience in the industry, I think that he instinctively knows, like, hey man, you just don't go near that subject. It's just
Right.
not worth the heat that you're going to take. So you just, but yeah, man, there's definitely pressure in the industry for people to, toe that line and not, and to conform to kind of the groupthink that we all know too well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been kind of a similar, but maybe not quite as I mean, the tide's changing in lots of like, preconceived cycling truths. Like a big one is tire width. It used to be, 19 millimeter, 20 millimeter, and pump them up as hard as you can. But there's lots of new science and just data that shows that like a wider tire run at lower pressures is actually faster, even though it feels slower. But the actual science of it shows that it's faster. And maybe one day, we'll get to there with pedals, but probably not anytime soon.
No, well, that's the other side. Who's going to fund that study?
Right.
Like people, like, that's the funny, like, people don't really understand how science works. Like, there's you've got to come up with a study, and you got to get funding for it. Okay, so you got to find somebody who's willing to fund the study. Well, who wants to fund the study that disproves clipless pedals? Shimano ain't funding that study. Like, who's funding that study, right? And then the same thing, like, you don't want to be the scientist. Like, if you want to get a paper published, you can't go against the mainstream ideas. And so, like, you run a study that you know, concludes that clipless pedals are better, and you know, that's going to get you published, and now you're a published scientist and all this stuff and blah blah blah. So there's a game there. And again, I'm not trying to take away from it, right? Like, it's like everything else. Like, there's good and bad with everything. But for people to pretend that somehow science is just unaffected by the realities that everyone else is of trying to figure out, how do I climb my career ladder? You know, where am I going to get money for this? Like, these things affect what are they studying, you know? And so I highly doubt we're going to get somebody who really just does some really strong definitive studies on these things and comes up with it anytime soon. But like I said, though, there is some studies out there, and you can see a lot of them were set up trying to prove clipless pedals were better. And unfortunately, the conclusions didn't support that idea. And so again, like, what is the truth, and how should we be applying that to the bike is really kind of the idea behind that, and what ultimately kind of led to the catalyst pedal as well. But
so you've got,
there's definitely.
You've got those studies there. I'm gonna put the link to the manifesto in the video description, but the studies are linked to and referenced in the actual manifesto, right? So if people want to delve in and check them out, they can.
Yes. No, the manifesto is a pretty sizable document, but it starts out with the science. I mean, I definitely have some opinion pieces and things like that where I'm trying to, like, you know, make some logical arguments about what's going on here. But there is actual science. And you can check that out. I've got the references, so you can go Google it and look at the studies yourself. But it's got, you can find all that stuff in the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto.
Cool. Well, let's start talking about the pedal, because when I reached out to you guys initially to review this pedal, I don't know if it was you, James, or someone that was helping you. They're very specific about, you know, it's not just a big pedal, even though it's a big pedal, but it also requires a change in position to fully utilize the benefits of such a big pedal. Can you talk about, I guess, maybe the switch from pedaling on the ball of your foot to a midfoot stance?
Yes. And so, my wife, Kiele, helps me out with that stuff, but we had come up with this because our first couple reviewers that we had, we found out that, you know, if you just kept trying to push through the ball of your foot, you weren't really going to get the benefits of the pedal. And so, you know, we just wanted to ask the people who were going to check it out, give it an honest try the way that it was intended to, because like you said, it's not just a pedal, it is a new way of pedaling your bike that only this pedal allows. It's a new foot position and way of supporting your foot that allows literally a completely different way for your foot and your lower leg and your whole body to function on the bike. And so the insight for me came, you know, again, I've been the flat pedal guy for years and years before I had the idea for the catalyst pedal. At the very least, I said, you know, you should be training on flats, right? Like the best analogy that I have was that you could look at clipless pedals like a weight belt, right? Like if you look at power lifters when they're competing, do they wear a weight belt? Well, yeah. Does this mean that everyone needs to wear a weight belt from day one every time they go in the gym? Well, no, nobody would argue that, right? Like you want to build your technique naturally. You want to do your deadlifts and your squats and these other lifts naturally to make sure that you're not leaning on this technology, you know, to kind of cover up some dysfunction. Like that's the problem is like technology, like, yeah, it's great. It can make things better, but it can also cover up these dysfunctions. And that's what, you know, so that's what happens with a lot of people with clipless pedals is that they get on them too early. They don't really develop a proper pedal stroke. They don't really learn how to move on the bike properly. And so they become like the guy who walked into the gym and, you know, saw the big guys lifting with weight belts and put a weight belt on and it's just been wearing it ever since. And he literally can't work out without it. You take that weight belt off, and his strength goes away, and his injury potential goes up, and all this stuff. And he'd be like, dude, lifting without a weight belt is stupid. Why would I do that? Right. But again, like in this context, everyone, it makes no sense, right? Like people are like, man, no one would say that. Like, it's ridiculous. We all understand the value of working on your movement naturally, and then using technology perhaps to enhance it. Again, as a former track athlete, we had training shoes, and then we had racing flats. Did we run faster in the racing flats? Yes. But that didn't mean that we wanted to use them every single time. Like, they would break this down. There were things that there were negatives that came along with that. And so it just really kind of blew my mind that we understand this in so many other sports and so many other contexts, but somehow when it comes to the cycling, we can't understand like the value of learning on flats and building your technique on flats and spending 80-90+% of your time on flats, maybe 100% of your time. If you don't compete, like, really, why are you wearing clipless pedals? Like, if you're not paying your mortgage, and again, because everything has a drawback. Like, there are drawbacks to clipless pedals. There is actually science that shows that clipless pedals increase your chance of a hip injury if you wreck, right? It's not just opinion. There's science that backs this up. Like, clipless pedals will increase your risk of injury. So if you're not paying your mortgage based on how you perform, why are you increasing this injury risk for what really accounts to like a very small percentage point? This was another thing that I noticed in working with pro riders is that when they put flat pedals on, their riding didn't just collapse. Like, they were almost as good on flats as they were on clipless pedals.
Right.
And that was a marked difference than what you see from your average rider on clipless pedals. You put them on flats and they're like a baby deer, right? Standing there on wobbly legs. They don't know what to do. And so that was another thing that led, it's like the pros have these skills on flats, and then they're using the clipless pedals in specific situations to help them perform better, where a couple percentage points can make the difference between a podium and not, right? And so for them, that trade-off makes sense. But for your average rider, that trade-off doesn't make sense. And again, but this isn't the narrative that the cycling industry is telling people. You're just being told, put a weight belt on, wear it every time you go to the gym. Mm-hmm. And then if you question it, Tour de France, right? I call it the Tour de France argument, right? Because I can insert whatever professional event or even like pro rider you want to, but it's this pointing to the pros and saying, well, that's what they do. Okay, man, that's fine. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the best thing for you. Like, you're not riding in the Tour de France, are you? Right. So the Tour de France argument it's kind of one of these straw man arguments that people throw up. That's like, okay, well, I can't really, that's fine, but that's not looking at the science. That's not looking at the movement principles. You're just basically asking me to throw all this stuff out because Tour de France. And but
let's talk about how does this pedal change your movement for the better? Like, what did it enable?
So that was So that was kind of my next insight, right? Like, so I'd had this original insight into like the science of movement principles. And then, so I knew that flat pedals were a great option for most people, that you weren't really losing anything, and, that you were going to feel better riding them. I'd actually had a couple people who were ready to quit riding because they hurt so bad during and after rides, switch to flats, and all of a sudden they get a new lease on life, right? So like, I'd had these original insights, but one day I'm sitting on the trail and I'm wondering, I'm like, man, why don't I need stiff-soled shoes in the gym? Why can I go in the gym and I can work out barefoot and I can lift all this weight, but I get on a bike and my foot turns into this weak, unstable mess, right? Like, I either need stiff shoes, which are really uncomfortable, or else I can have softer shoes, which are more comfortable, but then they flex a lot, and they, if you don't have super sticky rubber, your feet are bouncing around, and it's like, what is it, man? Like, I'm a fan of barefoot running, barefoot training, like the book Born to Run, had a real big influence on my, thinking. And so I know the foot is this amazing, amazing thing. So why is it when we get on the bike, it falls to pieces?
Right.
And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm wondering, and all of a sudden this thought just comes out of the blue. It says, well, because the ground supports both ends of your arch. Like, that was the big insight, that like when you're in the gym and you're doing squats, deadlifts, lunges, any of these things, the ground supports both ends of your arch. And so when both ends of the arch are supported, like the arch is one of the strongest forms in nature, but only if you support both ends. You destabilize one end and the whole thing falls to crap. And, again, just from a functional movement standpoint, if you can't put pressure through the back end of your arch, you have trouble recruiting your hips. So this is one of the reasons in the gym people will say, hey, drive through your heels, right? Like you don't want to come up on your toes and push through your toes when you're doing lunges and squats. And this is why, because when you do that, you don't get the pressure through the heel that allows you to recruit your hips. And so you end up putting a lot more stress on your knees and your low back. And so that was my original kind of aha. And the problem is, just kind of backing up a little bit, people have a misconception about the pedal stroke. They think that it's like running or walking or jumping, but it's not, right? So athleticism is context specific. You have to understand the context that you need the body to perform in. So being athletic as a swimmer is going to be different than being athletic as a cyclist, which is different than being a runner, right? So what is the context for moving on our bike? Well, when you look at our feet aren't coming off the pedals, right? Our feet are staying in contact with the pedals throughout the entire pedal stroke, at least hopefully, right? Like we don't want them to come off. And so that is a very different context than when your foot pushes off of what it's on. So this is like a difference between like surfing or skateboarding or, skiing. These are examples of sports where your foot doesn't come off of what it's on. Like when you're surfing, your foot, you want it to stay planted. Mm-hmm. And when you are playing soccer or even like Olympic lifting, like people who haven't Olympic lifted before don't realize that you're actually jumping off the ground, right? Like one of your cues is to jump and then slam your heels back down to the ground. So you are actually jumping and you want your foot to break contact ever so briefly with the ground. So this is a different context. But these are the examples that people give, right? Like when they say, like, oh, this is why you need to push through the ball of your foot. When you run, when you jump, look at Olympic lifters, you produce the most power, you're athletic, all of these things. But every context that they give to back that up is a context where your foot is coming off the ground or what it's on. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at sports and activities where your foot doesn't come off of the ground, the context is different and how your foot works is different. And so this is why in the gym, you want to drive through a strong foot. You want to have your foot, the ball of the foot and the heel driving into the ground because you want to pressurize both ends of the arch in order to get the body to work properly. So again, you see this in like surfing and skating. And so when people say like no athletic movement takes place on the ball of the foot, I hear this a lot in cycling. It's like, what about surfers? You can tell me surfers aren't athletic. They're not on the ball of their feet. So like, that right there, like you just need one example. There's multiple examples, but when you say there's no athletic movement, all you need is one example to shoot that entire argument to pieces. Mm-hmm. So there's multiple examples of that. And so like I said, so that was my second insight with the Catalyst pedal was that we needed a pedal that mimicked the ground. We needed something that was long enough to allow us to connect and get pressure between both ends of the arch so that we could stabilize the arch. And ultimately, just a whole host of benefits come from that, which, I can, we can get into more here in a second. But that was the insight and the idea was it was a movement principle based insight based on the context of the foot on the bike and just realizing like, man, people have just made a mistake. People forget like the bike as we know it's called the safety cycle it's like 150 years old or less, right? Which is a blink in the eye of time, right? So it's not a super old thing. It's not like we've had hundreds or of years to figure out the best way to do this thing.
Right.
You literally had guys with bowler hats and handlebar mustaches going, well, look at that new contraption over there. That looks like running or walking, I tell you. Well, you must want to push through the ball of your foot because that's what you do when you run or walk. This is literally how this came about. And it just kept getting repeated over and over and over until it became part of the dogma in the cycling industry without anyone actually stopping to check and see. And when they did, like I said, one of the studies that I found that checked the ball of the foot versus the midfoot position, they found out that, oh, wait a minute, it's not more efficient. Actually, the midfoot position was produced the same results. But again, you got to remember is this was on a pedal that wasn't designed for the midfoot position. So if you put someone on the Catalyst pedal, I guarantee you they would produce better results than what they did on the small flat pedal. But what they found was that where the energy was coming from was different, right? So when you're pushing through the ball of the foot, you're putting more stress on your calf and Achilles tendon. And when you're driving through a midfoot position, you're taking the stress off of those areas and putting them on your hips, which is where you want them, right? One of the biggest problems that cyclists have is tight calves, plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendon problems. All of these are a direct result of your body having to get stiff to try to support the back end of the arch because there's nothing underneath it to support it. If you don't have something structurally underneath it to support it, a stiff-soled shoe is not the same thing. It makes the foot stiff, but there's still nothing for it to drive into. Like the stiffest carbon-soled shoe is still going to flex more than my flip-flops on the Catalyst pedal. Because my foot is supported by a piece of aluminum that's not going to flex at all. The both ends of the arch, I get zero flex out of my foot because of the pedal supporting it. When you're relying on the shoe to support it, it's impossible. You're never going to support it 100%, and it's not the way the body was designed to work. So anyways, yeah, that was kind of the insight and kind of the what led to the initial design.
Yeah,
let me start looking into it more.
Yeah, let me open it up really quickly to questions. If you guys are in the Zoom room and if you have a question for James, raise your blue hand and I will unmute you guys. All right, we got a question here from Sean. You've got the floor.
Yeah, hi. So I'm curious to know what the implications are for this, moving your foot forward a few centimeters or something like that to your entire bike fit. I know for me, I like to switch it up. When I go on a long ride, I'll put the clipless pedals on because I'm afraid. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this complete revolution in my long distance cycling, but around town, the flats go on, the basket comes out, and off I go around town. But if I have to switch my feet forward a couple centimeters, doesn't that mean everything about my bike fit has changed?
You're going to have to move your seat down some and possibly forward a little bit. You're actually pulling your center of gravity down and in. So you're stabilizing yourself. Actually, like that, this is one of the things that people find that the Catalyst pedals help is that like they feel like they're able to corner better because you're more planted. You're closer to being over the center of the bike. And so when you're on your tiptoes, your hips, which are your center of gravity, roughly, right? Like technically, whatever. That's the basic area. You got your hips up high, and then you move to the midfoot position, and it pulls the hips down and in a little bit. And so you're actually putting your body in a more balanced position, along with getting your foot lined up in a better position to be able to actually drive through the whole foot and use your hips. And, the hips are such an important part of creating, good, efficient, powerful lower body movement. And so when you don't have that pressure under the back end of the arch, you lose out on that. But so yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But actually, I have a guy right now. I mean, this is one of those things, man. I've had people email me and tell me that they have had bike fitters refuse to fit them on my pedals. They had to come back with their clipless pedals so that they could do their little formula, so they could put up the little lasers where they needed to be and all the little things that they learned. And then, so they went and did it and then went home and put their Catalyst pedals on and just kind of adjusted things to where they needed to be in the first place. So, but I'll tell you just on a personal side note, I think bike fits are kind of slightly overrated because anytime you stand up, a bike fit's worthless, right? As soon as you stand up, like where your seat is, it's not totally worthless, but a lot of a bike fit is centered around finding a perfect seated pedaling position. And so as soon as you stand up and you shift your hips shift forward, you get taller. like that standing pedaling position. And this is one of the things people find when you get the Catalyst pedals. Standing pedaling is a way more stable, way more powerful position, because when you're standing on your tiptoes and you got unbalanced forces going into those pedals, it makes standing pedaling really unstable, and it makes it uncomfortable because you're constantly driving your toes down into the toe box because you have this unstable energy pushing into the pedal and making your foot roll forward like that. And so when you're able to stabilize that energy out, then it makes standing pedaling, you feel like you're on a stair stepper, right? You feel like you're a kid on a BMX bike, just able to stand up and just like, yeah, man, this is so much fun. And but standing pedaling is so much better for you. You get 100% knee extension. I don't care how expensive a bike fit you paid for, you ain't getting 100% knee extension, right? As soon as you stand up, you get 100% knee extension. You get pressure on your foot and your leg, because you want a co-contraction between your quad and your hamstring to stabilize the knee joint, like at the bottom position. So as your hips are actually pulling the leg through the most powerful part of the pedal stroke, your body's designed, like when you run, you get this co-contraction to stabilize the knee. And you can't get that when you're sitting down. And so if you're trying to in these high tension situations, you're running a lot of pressure and a lot of tension through your legs in a seated position, man, it is just hell on your knees. It is not healthy for your legs at all. And so the way that I recommend people do it is you use seated pedaling as a recovery position, right? Like when there's very little tension on the system, you don't have to worry about it. You're not cementing. Like stiffness is cheap tension, right? Your body's like, man, I'm always creating tension in this position. Well, tension is metabolically expensive. If I just create stiffness, it doesn't take energy to maintain stiffness. And so that's why you start to get stiff in the positions that you're in. And so if you're in the adult fetal position, man, if you're bent over and you're seated and you're just constantly, just laying high tension on that position, your body starts to create stiffness in that position. And so the idea is to use the seated pedaling as a low tension recovery tool, and then stand up as your high tension, like performance position. And that is way healthier for your body and your legs and everything. Like, yeah, the whole seated, the bike fit industry exists because they're trying to polish a turd. Like, it's a turd, man. Seated pedaling is a turd. It's bad for you. It's horrible for your body, no matter how much you polish it up. And as soon as you stand up, man, you get way more functional. Your body gets in a way more functional position. And so, yeah, it's just, once you realize too, that you don't need your butt on the seat for weight on the back tire, that it's a pressure thing that you need, and you can create that pressure without having your butt on the seat. That's another thing that kind of keeps a lot of riders locked onto their seat, is because they're afraid that if I stand up on climbs, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to slide out. Well, if that was true, the heaviest riders would never lose traction, right? 250-pound Clydesdale would just up everything because he's got so much weight, right? But we know that's not the case. So it's not weight that you need, it's pressure, right? Pressure is weight used actively. And so you can actually get too much weight on the back end and slide out. So anyways, I know that's a little bit of a side tangent, but it kind of ties into the Catalyst pedal, because it opens up a whole side of riding that you don't even realize that your pedals are sucking you into, which is this seated sit and spin philosophy. So anyways, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. I know for me, I've been trying these pedals out for, I think, at least like 2 months. I did make some adjustments, kind of what you generally recommend. My saddle dropped a little bit, and then I also had to move the saddle like a little bit forward to I feel like best utilize this. I will say it was hard to detrain my brain to expect pressure on the ball of my foot. Like at first it was a little disconcerting, just because I wasn't, like there wasn't any pressure on the ball of my foot, and I felt like I was pedaling in air. And it wasn't until, at least for me, I don't know if this is what you recommend, but using the side edge of my foot also. So not only the ball, but the side edge and the rear, to feel really grounded, because otherwise it was, I wasn't feeling any pressure in my arch. So that wasn't giving me feedback on how I was pedaling. But once I started to incorporate like the side edge of the foot more, it felt a little bit better.
Yes, yeah, no. I mean, any your foot is designed to create pressure through the ball, the heel, and that outside edge. And so when I'm working in the gym, strength coaching with somebody, I'm watching their feet and how do their feet create pressure into the ground, because you can tell a lot about how they're moving through that. And so yeah, having the creating pressure through that outside edge is really important. But it's funny you mention that, because that's actually one of the reasons that people's feet kind of roll off pedals. Like people want wider pedals, is because when you only have pressure under the ball of the foot, your body's trying to find that extra pressure point. So it kind of rolls over to that side edge and creates this rolling motion. And once you get the pressure under the heel, now it's able to just drive straight down. And so you get rid of that rolling motion. And so I've had a lot of people ask, like, why is your pedal not wider? Because in their experience, they feel like their feet are rolling off. And so they need a wider pedal as well as a longer pedal. But the wider pedal the need for a wider pedal only comes from the pedal not being long enough. And once you get that stable, everything drives straight down. You're not going to have your foot rolling off the outside edge like that. But yeah, you do need to use the whole foot, all three pressure points, because that's the way the foot's designed to work.
Yeah, that was a new experience. I was like, oh, this is very, very different.
Yeah.
Let's see, in the Zoom, do any of you guys have other questions? Raise your blue hand. And in the YouTube chat, don't mean to ignore you guys. I can see that there's about 140 of you guys in the chat here. So let us know where you're watching from. And if you have any questions specifically for James, I will relay it to him via Zoom. Curious to know how many of you guys use the Callus pedal currently, and what do you guys think? I have found, so I tend to ride small frames, and in a road bike, like, toe overlap is an issue. Like on the mountain bike, like as the frames have gotten slacker, the front wheel is out, less of an issue. But that was one thing where, if you have like a super tight road frame, that it might be problematic. I mean, like is that what you're finding as well?
No. Yeah. And this is, again, part of the dogma that people don't even realize how deep it is in the industry, that they're literally designing bikes that cannot allow the midfoot position. Because what you're finding, it's not the pedal, right? It's the midfoot position. Because you could put a regular flat pedal on there and go to the same foot position, and you're still going to get the same toe overlap issue. And so it's the midfoot position that is a problem. And they design bikes, especially small frames. We've had, unfortunately, more than a handful of very disappointed people have to return the pedals after realizing that their frame was not made for them to be able to use the midfoot position. Mm-hmm. And so, this whole thing about like let people choose, it's like, that's bullcrap. The cycling industry isn't going to let people, you wouldn't design bikes based on this position that wouldn't allow the midfoot position if you really were about letting people choose. It's like, no, we know what's best. It's pushing through the ball of the foot. We don't need to design bikes for the midfoot position. So on small bikes, we can get that super tight. Like, there's actually one of my more infamous articles on bikejames.com back in the day was, why is Trek putting an anti-flats sticker on their bikes? And it had been brought to my attention, and it's still on their bikes, man. You go into any Trek dealer and you look, and odds are there's going to be this little white sticker sitting on the crank arms, and it's going to say, this bike is designed to be equipped with pedals that have a positive retention device, such as clipless or toe clips.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No. It is. And like I said, it's still there. And I started looking in. It's like, whoa, this is crazy, right? And so I started, figure out who to contact, and through various things, got them to try and give me their excuse. And they said that it was some international law that they had to comply to. I look up the law, and again, just like the studies, like they were misrepresenting like what the law actually said. Mm-hmm. And at that point, they just went silent. They just went dark on me. And this is during, I was riding for Pink Bike at the time. And one of the reasons I got the Trek to even talk to me in the first place is because I'd gotten the editor at Pink Bike interested, just kind of curious, like, wow, that is kind of curious. I wonder why that is. And so he said, like, yeah, we might run that, see what you find out. We might run that story. So I approached Trek like, hey, I'm doing this story for Pink Bike. And so that's the only reason I think they gave me the time of day. But at first they tried to blame it on the crank manufacturer, saying that it was coming from the crank manufacturer. So I contacted some people I knew, and they're like, no, that's not us. They're being put on a Trek. And so I said, this isn't the case. You know, what's the deal? It's this thing called investigative journalism. You don't really, like, I'm an idiot. And this is probably some of the deepest investigative journalism the cycling world has seen in a long, long time.
Right.
And, but in you know, then they reference the law, and I come back and say, hey, that's not accurate either. What's going on? And at this point, they just went dark. And this is when I had my infamous conversation with the guy who at the time was the editor at Pink Bike Magazine, or pinkbike.com, you know, largest mountain bike media source on the planet. And he tells me, I swear to God, this is pretty much a quote. He goes, when he called to tell me that they're not going to run the story. And I'm like, why, man? This is crazy. They're doing this, and it's bull crap, and it's misleading people. And why aren't you going to run the story? He goes, look, we all know clipless pedals are a problem. We all know that they're oversold to people, but saying something isn't going to do anything, and it's just going to piss people off. So we're not going to do it.
Pedalgate.
You know what I mean? But this is the nonsense. That, like, honestly, like, you know, whatever. These are the conversations. I've had several conversations with people in the industry that would just, if people really knew what was going on and what people really knew, they would be freaking flabbergasted. It's right. Like, yeah, we know that clipless pedals are oversold to the public, but, you know, that's just how it is. Right. And then you go to Pink Bike and you see Shimano with their SPD, you know, pedal ad there, and I know from experience running Pedaling Innovations, like, you're not going to get any press releases or anything run on a website that you're not doing advertising on. Like, that's just right. Par for the course in the industry. So, you know, there's money, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of money behind it. But that was a really frustrating conversation for me. So I ended up just running it on my website, took a freaking beating over it. Man, people were just coming down on me hard for that. But yeah, that's so anyways, yeah. I forgot how we got on that subject, but that was
well, let me go to the chat here. Let's see where people are from. Let's see. We've got Ohio, someone from Denmark. AJKC13 says, I'm building up a new bike and I'll probably try them. Let's see. What else? All right. And let's go to the Zoom here. So Sean asks, here's a question. How did you come to the pedal length that you use on your pedals, given the difference in foot sizes? And I would assume arch length.
Yep, it is arch length. I got a size 10 foot, and so I just went home and measured what the distance was between my arch, and, you know, played around with a few distances, because, you know, what I found is there is a sweet spot, because like, we have our regular Catalyst pedal, and then we also have the Catalyst XL. And so, like, this is for, you know, the XL is for people who have a size 13 or larger foot, because, you know, once you get to that size, the arch length is such that you start to get some of that wraparound that we're trying to get away from. And so, but too long, like, I ride those and I actually lose some of my grip. Like, there's a sweet spot where if it's too big, that you're not able to kind of settle into the arch a little bit. You want the arch connected, but if you can settle into it just a little bit, you'll get a little bit more stability than if it's just, you know, spread out over the whole foot. So, so yeah, and this is actually the youth version. My son has a pair of these on his bike at the moment. We're prototyping the small, but yeah, no, it is based on foot size, and you know, the regular pedal is about, like, you know, size 8 to size 12, 13. But yeah, if you got like a size 14 plus foot, then the XL would be a better one for you. But yeah, pretty much arch length, and then just the width, because I ride the trails here in Grand Junction, have a lot of rocks, and I don't want any pedal that I don't have to have poking out the side of my foot. And so that's why I kept them a standard length or width. I didn't think they needed to be wider. And I've kind of found the XL pedal is a little wider to accommodate for the foot, but yeah, that's kind of how we arrived at that.
Cool. So we got a question here from Michael Mann. He says, any chance we'll see a re-release of the purple pedal?
You know, the purple pedal will be back in the lineup. It probably will not be in 2020, my friend.
No.
2020 is an interesting year. We do have a cool green pedal that will be here the end of September. That'll be the first time that we're going to have that color going. And so, yeah, we've got some something fun with that. But yeah, the purple pedals will make a return on some level, but probably won't be this year.
Yeah, cool. Well, we're getting close to we're at the top of the hour. I mean, I know that this is the second time we're doing the first half of this video. Any other questions in the Zoom before we take it home here? And in the YouTube chat, let me know if you have any last minute questions for James.
Yeah.
I have to say, one of the things, I've been enjoying the pedal so far, but probably my favorite thing is just your tenacity in sticking with the flat pedal, despite, the obvious kind of like industry pushback. I mean, it's tough to believe something and, find the data that supports it, but then have an industry unwilling to accept it because money,
Yeah, it's called the Semmelweis effect. I think it's named after the guy who originally figured out that if you just wash your hands, you wouldn't kill babies. Right. And he ended up in an insane asylum because doctors refused to do it. It's like every successful doctor up to this point has not washed his hands. But why would we need to start now? So there's a psychological phenomenon that humans have to reject what is new, even if it is better. And so, yeah, unfortunately, it's a normal psychological thing, but I'm just hoping that through things like the Flat Pedal Revolution Manifesto, talking with you on here, just give people a chance to maybe break free of some of that stuff.
Yeah, cool.
So
well,
I was gonna say I did see there was a. Oh no! I was just gonna say there was a question about like being able to move the feet around like on longer rides, and that is actually like one of the nice things about the pedal is that, and one of the reasons it's actually better than clipless pedals for long rides is because your body needs micro changes over time. Like when you look at a runner, their running stride is not 100% the same every time. There's micro variations every time. And so when you have this quote unquote perfect foot position with a clipless pedal, you're actually creating more micro trauma on your body. Every time you put your foot on a flat pedal, there's going to be slight little variations. So you can still have it in the proper position, but it's going to be a slight variation each time. And so those slight variations are actually going to take some of that repetitive stress off of the joints as compared to the clipless pedal where you're just locked into that same foot position every time. So but yeah, sorry, I saw that. I just wanted to make sure we address that question.
Yeah, cool. Well, with all of that, I think I'm going to take it home here. Thanks again, James, for joining us today. Apologies, YouTube, for the late start. We'd actually been having a lovely discussion for about 15 minutes before I realized that the stream was not going live to YouTube and had to redo that the first 10 minutes. Thank you guys in the Zoom room for being patient. Let's see. Any last words before we sign off here, James?
No, like I said, just look into it for yourself. Just it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, the rabbit hole, right? Like, depending upon what rabbit hole you start going down will depend upon where you end up. And so the ball of the foot is a rabbit hole that the industry started running down without ever really checking. And so once you start going down a different rabbit hole and you start looking into, well, what does the science and the movement principles say? You end up at a different place, which is basically something that supports your foot like the Catalyst pedal does. Hopefully just giving some people some fuel for thought. And we do have a 30-day money-back guarantee. And even that, man, we're pretty generous with that. I mean, we've had people return pedals beat to shit after a couple months of use. And for whatever reason, they wanted a refund. Hey, man, no problem. Like, I'm a rider too, and I know, how much it sucks to have a company claim that something's awesome and then not back it up
Right.
So yeah, if you want to try them risk free. And if they don't work for you, we'll take them back. But man, most people find that once they try them, they end up ordering more.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you again, James. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And again, thanks again for your patience.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of fun and interesting bikey content coming up in the next couple of weeks. The Rivendell is going to have its final review. I think I scheduled that on Monday. I'm going to give you guys an update on the Hunt wheels I've been testing. So lots of interesting products and of course, more interesting guests. And until next time, keep the supple side down.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for being patient for that.